So allow me to formally welcome you to the event. We're really excited to be sharing with you the key proposals in the second exposure draft of INPAG, International Non-Profit Accounting Guidance, specifically so that you can give us your feedback. My name is Samantha Musoke, and I'm the IFR for MPO Project Director for Humentum. I'm based in Uganda. Many of you have received an invitation or an email from me, so thank you for your positive response. Joining me today, I'm delighted to welcome Karen Sanderson, who is the INPAG Technical Director at CIPFA, that's the Chartered Institute of Public Finance and Accountancy. Karen and I work very closely together to ensure the guidance is developed with appropriate technical rigour and informed by input from stakeholders. We're also joined by Philip Trotter, who's an associate of CIPFA and who's been really at the heart of the drafting of the text for the various sections that we issued in Exposure Draft 2. So we really have the right people in the room to answer our questions and add colour and context. So welcome. I hope that many of you have attended earlier events and have some awareness about the IFR for MPO project and INPAG. So rather than giving an introduction in each of these webinars in the series, there are two videos that can give you the necessary background. You can find them on YouTube or on the website. One is about the project in general, and there's another about Exposure Draft 2, giving a sort of overview. So if we could have the next slide, please. So today's webinar is part of a series covering the main themes in Exposure Draft 2. You can register for future events or view resources from previous ones from the website, and you can see the link there. We're nearly at the end. The last one is later this week. Super. Next slide, please. So we're really keen to hear your thoughts and feedback. The perspective of people working in the sector, as well as donors, auditors, and the accounting profession around the world, are really essential to making sure the guidance is relevant, user-friendly, credible, fit for purpose, so that it can be widely adopted, which is what we all want. The project started back in 2019, and we have had input from experts and advisors to reach the point of having this second exposure draft to share with you and getting public feedback as part of this consultation. So the purpose of our 1-hour webinar today is to explain the proposals and for you to have the opportunity to ask questions, seek clarifications, as well as share your comments and opinions and feedback. At the end of the webinar, we will also tell you how you can submit a formal response to the consultation. So on the next slide, I think it will show the flow for today's session. We've already finished the first part, which is the introduction. And with that, now I'm going to do something a bit unusual, but it's what we've been doing throughout this series. We're going to actually watch a video on YouTube that we've prepared in advance to explain the proposals on foreign currency translation. There's a playlist that has the same video in English, French, and Spanish. It's 17, 18, 19 minutes in different languages. Now, the reason that we're going to YouTube to do that is so that everybody can watch the video in their preferred language. If you do see adverts from YouTube, they're not to do with us, and we're not formally endorsing any adverts that you might see, but please just click on through and watch them. So as you watch the video, just think about how the proposals apply in situations that you're familiar with in your context. Please type any questions that come to mind in the chat as we go along. You can use the Zoom chat for English. You can use the Microsoft Translator app for questions in your own language. And then after that video is finished, we will come back together in Zoom and respond to selected questions. After this event, because of the language considerations, we will only receive written questions and comments, I'm afraid. Okay, so do you want to go to the next slide? And hopefully the link to the videos is coming up in the chat. There it is. Okay, so the sound will now be off here in Zoom. You can each go to YouTube and watch the video there, and we'll see you back here in 19 or so minutes. Thank you very much. Okay, so hopefully you've had a chance to watch that video in different languages. It's I won't pretend it's not the easiest of YouTube videos. It is quite hard, but it is a really difficult subject. So hopefully it's helped. The examples have been helpful. Let's start, I think, with a poll, which Brian, could you help us launch the poll? For those of you putting your hands up, I explained earlier, we will actually only take comments in writing, if that's okay. So please do share your comment or your question in the chat. We'd really love to hear it. But for a moment, we've got a brief poll, I hope. Yes, the videos will be available after the call. There'll be a video of this webinar itself with the introduction and the Q&A, and there'll also be a video of the explainer video that was on YouTube is there. Will not go away. So if you want to go to the IFR for MPO YouTube account, you can see it there. Brian, is there a challenge with the poll? Okay, well, I'll tell you what, we'll go into some questions and we'll see if we can do the poll later.
Sam, the poll is running.
Oh, it's just that I can't see it.
Yeah, the poll is running.
Great. Maybe Karen, I'll let you lead on the poll then, so you can see what's happening.
Just give it a little bit longer. We've got just over half of people have responded to it so far. So, well, just give people a moment to respond to that. There's a few more people who want to come in.
Want to read the questions, Karen? Because unfortunately on the video you can't see the poll.
So the first question is, how useful are the examples in the video? And that's very useful, quite useful, not useful. And then there's a second question about, do you think the proposals will improve transparency about gains and losses relating to grants, where the choices are a lot, a bit, not really, or not sure? So those are the two questions that are in the poll. We've now just tipped over 60% of people responding, so perhaps we'll close it at that point. If you could end the poll. So in terms of how useful are the examples in the video, the vast majority of people, 98% of people, are saying quite useful or very useful. Which is that's really helpful feedback for us, and we're always happy to take feedback on trying to improve what we've got. So that's good to know that they are helpful. And then the second question about whether the proposals will improve transparency, a bit more differences of view there. So 48% think a lot, 32% a bit. So cumulatively, 80% thinking that there will be some improvement from these proposals. 8% don't think they will improve transparency, and then there's about 12% who are not sure whether it will or whether it won't. And of course, we do appreciate that this is kind of your reactive feedback after having just looked at the video, and no doubt as you learn more about this, your thoughts will change. But thank you for your feedback on that. That's really helpful. And so, Sam, I'll pass that back to you.
Brilliant. Thank you, Karen. So let's start with a question that's come into the chat here, which is the difference between presentation currency and reporting currency, or presentation currency and functional currency. What do those different things mean? Can you clarify that?
Yeah, sure, no problem. And I just wanted to start by echoing what Sam was saying at the very beginning. This is a complex topic. Whether you work for a non-profit organization or any other organization, it is a challenging topic for everybody who deals with it. So I just wanted to put that out there. to start with. So functional currency is basically the currency that is the predominant currency for your organization. So it is the currency that you primarily transact in. So it's part of the function of how you operate, which is why it's called the functional currency. So your functional currency is not an accounting policy choice. It's done through an assessment. So you have to look at the kinds of transactions that you have and where they come from to determine what is the appropriate functional currency. And this will include where the currencies in which you buy goods and services, the currencies in which you pay your employees. And importantly, for non-profit organizations, we have made the adaptation to say also where you get your grants from or where you pay your grants to. So it takes into account all of the transactions that you do. Once you have your functional currency, you shouldn't really change it. That's it. It's not an accounting policy. It only changes if your organizational circumstances change. So, if you started putting all your employees overseas and all your donations came from a different jurisdiction, and that started to become the majority of your transactions, you might change your functional currency as a consequence of that. The presentation currency is the currency that you use for preparing your financial statements. For most organizations, that is the same as the functional currency, because it will typically be the jurisdiction that you're operating in, and that will make most sense. But you can opt to use a different currency for presentation, but it's not a pick and mix. You can't have one presentation for your income and expenditure statement and a different presentation for your statement of financial position. It has to be for all the transactions you have as an entity. And so one of the things that we're aware of is that donors like to see things presented in particular currencies. We are looking at supplementary information or supplementary statements to do that kind of reporting if there are selected transactions that you need to present in a particular way. But as I say, you can't choose particular transactions. It's for your whole of your financial statements. And generally, this is used when you've got a foreign operation that's operating in a different currency and you want to combine them, consolidate them into your own accounts. I hope that explains the difference between it.
Functional and presentation, great. And as you said, some donors sometimes want to have their project presented in their currency. Do you want to speak a little bit to what we're hoping to do in ED3?
Yeah,
that
sure.
might help that.
Yeah, so we're working on proposals in ED3 about the format and presentation of supplementary information, and with supplementary information being able to be prepared based on donor requirements, so that you can do comparisons to budget, different currencies, the kinds of information that a donor might request. We are looking to link that into INPAG, and so where an organisation chooses to use what will be separate guidance for these supplementary statements, there are disclosures that we will require within the financial statements at a whole of entity level, and this one will create an anchor point in for that supplementary information to provide greater assurance for donors about the information that is being provided.
Super. So this isn't the end of the story when it comes to presentation in different currencies. What we've got here in section 30 is really about your general purpose financial statements. When we're talking about and how different grants are presented, when we're talking about reports to specific donors, we have got something extra for that coming in ED3. So look forward to that. Great, lots of comments coming in here. I've got another great question. When you recognize a grant, when you recognize grant revenue and that revenues come in a different currency, what exchange rate should you use?
Yeah. So generally, the guidance in this section says that you should use the exchange rate on the date of the transaction. Now, that would get pretty onerous because organizations have got lots of different transactions. So there is a sort of a practicality element in here that says that you can use an average, and that average could be over a week or it could be over a month. And that really all depends on the degree of fluctuation in the currency that's being used. So, you know, if you were if the jurisdiction that you were transaction with, their currency is fluctuating significantly, then you might have to use the spot rate on the day. But you can use averages as a practical expedient. In terms of when you recognize revenue, you'll have seen in the video that with revenue, there's two types. There is an OFA or there is an EGA. With the OFAs, then you would recognize it on receipt. So the spot rate on the date that you got the cash is the exchange rate that you would use, or an appropriate average. Where it's an EGA, that would depend on whether you're paid in advance or whether you're paid in arrears. If you're paid in advance, it would be you'd use the rate of the date that the advance was given to you. But if you're paid in arrears, it would be on the date that you recognized the revenue, which is when the EGO has been met. And at that point, you would have a payable. So it depends on what kinds of revenue you've got as to the exact exchange rate that is used. And not forgetting, of course, that you can use an average if that's appropriate.
Brilliant. And with grants, I guess you tend to have few larger transactions. So using the rate when you get, the rate on the date of the transaction isn't so difficult. There's a brilliant question in here from Jobra, which is around expenses allocated to grants, specifically overheads. So let's say I'm paying for these overheads throughout the year, different rates in different months, but I'm actually doing this allocation journal to allocate all those overheads to different funders, maybe at the end of the month, maybe at the end of a grant period, maybe at the end of a year. What rate do I use for that? If those overheads are incurred in my home currency and I'm trying to allocate them to different grants?
So for those, it's always going to be situationally specific in terms of the time period. But if they were incurred sort of reasonably evenly over the whole of the year, then I would look to the sort of the average for each month. So look at what has been kind of the allocation for that month, and then translate for that using that rate. I think there's a lot of pragmatism involved in this, and I think that the method and the rate you use has got to be based on your particular circumstances. I don't know. I would say that there's not a rule attached to this as to how you do it. But if the grant is sort of coming in steadily over a period and the overheads are being incurred steadily over a period, then it would make sense to use an appropriate exchange rate for each of those periods. But it might not work like that. It might be that it's paid, over a 2-month, period, and all the overheads happens in the final period. probably fairly unlikely. But they're more likely to be evenly over a period of time. But I would look at whatever is the monthly rate. And certainly in organizations that I've worked in, that's fairly typical to look at what is the average over the month and use that to translate transactions that have happened in that month.
Brilliant. And it's certainly in organizations I've been in, well, some of them, as you say, it does vary. There's no one size fits all, but it's been the functional currency that the overheads are in, and that allocation happens in functional currency, and then you're converting the report in functional currency to your donor currency. But I think this links nicely to a question or a comment from Margaret. I think the funds should be tracked in the contract currency and then disclosed at the functional or reporting currency. So this is a different way of doing it, right? You could do everything in your functional currency and translate it at the end into your contract. Or do you track everything in your contract currency and just translate it into functional at the end?
Well, I would always stick to what's in your accounting records and what's in your accounting system. So I would expect that to be in the functional currency, and that for the supplementary information to be for the contractual currency to be part of supplementary information. But I think it should be really linked to what's in your accounting records, because I think your accounting records should be your single version of the truth when it comes to the preparation of financial statements. And therefore that should be your start point.
And I think it also depends on your accounting system, doesn't it? So if you've got a really fancy accounting system that can track each transaction and balances in different currencies, which most small NPOs don't have, then you can track in both. But if you've got to choose between one or the other for your system, it's got to be functional, because you could have different donors in 4 different currencies. You've got to have everything in your own currency first.
Absolutely.
And I think this is, I think this feeds really nicely into this conversation a bit about shifting power, where at the moment so many hoops and loops are about, we've got to meet this donor and this donor and this donor and this donor. What we're trying to do with INPAG is let's focus on the needs of the organization and make the donor reporting a little bit secondary to the general purpose reporting. Now, obviously that does depend on donors lining up with this.
Oh, completely. And the greater we can get consistency from what donors require, then the more helpful that's going to be. But I think there's a high degree of kind of assurance that comes from having high quality financial statements. And so that's why I talk about single version of the truth, but that's kind of what I mean by that, is that high quality set of financial statements over which there is strong assurance, and from which you can then produce additional information. And for me, that's what sits at the core.
And I know we've had feedback from our donor reference group members as well, saying they see that line gains and losses on their grant reports and they immediately get suspicious. So I think more transparency and clarity is something that donors are looking for as well. Great, lots more comments in here as well. Let me take this one here. What happens when you have a donor, a recipient, and a sub-grantee all in different currencies? How do you handle that?
Like I said at the very beginning, this is a complex subject, and I think the key to this is that you need to transact in your functional currency. So when you get money in from a donor, you need to convert it from the currency that they're providing into your functional currency. And then when you are making payments to a sub-grantee, you need to record those transactions again in your functional currency. That is the common thread through all of these. And different transactions might be different. You might be paying a grantee in your own currency or their currency, but you always need to record what that expense is for you in your functional currency. And like I said, the same when you're getting a donation in as well. that you recognise that in your functional currency. So your functional currency is the common denominator through those transactions, and you're doing the translation at either end.
Great, and I'm seeing quite a lot. I can't get my head around everything in the chat, but I'm seeing quite a lot of reactions to this. Feels quite difficult compared to what many organizations do, which is everything in my donor currency and everything in my presentation currency. So it could mean some quite big changes, thinking about everything in my functional currency that I, as my organization, do most of my transactions in. So yeah, interesting one. And these comments are fantastic. So please keep them coming. Even if I can't address all of them in real time, they are hugely valuable for us. So please keep them coming. I wanted to take this question about exchange rates, and there's another gains and losses rather, and there's another one in the chat here. So firstly, just in general, how should gains or losses related to grant revenue be accounted for? And I know we've got this difference in the enforceable grant arrangement, the EGA, and the other funding arrangement, the OFA. So how do we account for gains on losses on grants?
So I think one of the key things I need to say out front is that in the proposals that we have on section 30 for foreign currency translation, we're not actually proposing any changes to the accounting in terms of when you recognise a foreign exchange gain or loss, or the way in which you do that. That is exactly the same as for any other entity. What we are proposing to be different is the way in which that is presented. And so the principle that is set out and proposed in INPAG is that exchange gains and losses are presented in the same way as the transaction to which they relate. And that matters when we're talking about whether whether a grant is part of funds with restrictions or whether it's part of funds without restrictions. So if the grant has been categorized as part of grant as funds with restrictions, then if there is a foreign exchange gain or loss associated with that grant, that will also be shown as part of funds with restrictions. So we bring transparency to that. It's not a bucket of foreign exchange gains and losses. It's separated out so that it can be seen separately. And that was something that people said was really important, particularly where the arrangement with the donor means that the NPO is taking an exchange risk, and so if the currency moves against them and they make a loss on the grant arrangement that exists, they then have to make up that shortfall from other resources they've got. There was a strong desire to see transparency over that, so that it was really clear that effectively the NPO was contributing to the delivery of that activity that was taking place, and that the donor wasn't fully funding it all. So presenting those separately provides some transparency around that. And so the underpinning principle is that the foreign exchange gains or loss follows how the initial transaction has been classified as to whether it's with restrictions or without restrictions. Hope that makes some sense.
Yeah, I think that comes out quite nicely in the examples, which could mean you have something in your restricted column, which is maybe a loss on exchange in the restricted column, but the donor's not paying for it, right?
Correct.
As in, so you have expenses or gains in that column, which might not be part of what the donor is accepting as their accountability. You're just showing what's happened on that grant.
Yeah, and just following on from that, I mean, as part of the work that we're now doing on exposure draft 3, where we're looking at the section about fund accounting and what information needs to be presented about funds. The work that we're doing really, I think, will shine a light on those kinds of transaction, and what's proposed in section 30 is a real enabler for that to happen. That principle is the key thing.
So having talked about gains and losses, let me move to Nato's question, which is, please could you elaborate a little bit more on unrealized exchange rate gains and losses from balance sheet revaluations? Is a clear guidance of which accounts should be revalued, sort of a distinction between monetary and non-monetary balances?
Yeah. So yeah, absolutely. And I think that you've hit on the key words there, whether something is a non-monetary item or whether it's a monetary item. Monetary items are generally those things that are either cash or can be translated into cash pretty quickly. So we're talking here about money in the bank, we're talking about payables and receivables, where they're about the flow of cash into the organizations, also include things like borrowings and things like that. It wouldn't include things like work in progress. It wouldn't include inventory or items like that. It really is those things that are on their way to being cash. That's what is a monetary item. And it's the monetary items that need to be retranslated at each reporting period. So, I mean, there is an exception related to non-current assets that are fair valued, but won't dwell on that. We're really just talking about monetary assets. So they have to be retranslated. And as you quite rightly say, they will be an unrealized gain or loss at that time. We're expecting that unrealized gain or loss to be shown in the statement of changes in net assets. And it's only at the point that it is realized that it will appear in the statement of income and expenses.
Yeah, thank you. Now I want to take this comment from Margaret, because I think this is really getting to the heart of how many CFOs in NPO, in non-profit organizations feel. She says, the moment you translate a contract received into your functional currency, you are taking the currency risk into your functional statements. The donor has not necessarily agreed to currency risk in their grants. So it's about currency risk, and this sort of difference between what's a business risk and what's a business gain or loss risk and an accounting. So could you speak to that? We're bringing functional currency risk into our statements.
Yeah, well, and you know, I think we show this in the examples here, and this is, some of this boils down to kind of business policy decisions. So we show in the example one where there is an arrangement and the monies received are translated when they are received. And so at that point, you've definitely taken, you know, the risk of that, and you're very clear about what your base point is. In another of the examples, the currency received is not translated straight away. It's actually held in a foreign currency bank account until it's needed, and you know that brings about different issues, and it's so very much a matter for each organization to determine how it wants to manage the foreign currency that it receives. We're not going to advise on that. There's plenty of people out there who will advise on those things. What we will say is what's the accounting, depending on when you do choose to translate or do choose to exchange the foreign currency that you have received. But there is definitely an interplay here between what the impact is going to be on your financial statements because of risk, and each organization is going to need to think about how it wants to manage its foreign currency risk that will then impact on the accounting.
Super. So I think that risk conversation is something we're also having with the donor reference group. And all these points you raised here are fantastic. We can take that to the donor reference group and say, this is what donor recipients are saying. How do we want this to work? That's a win-win. So this is really, really helpful. In our final few moments, allow me to wrap up with the final few slides. Brian, if you mind sharing the slides again. Any questions and comments that we haven't been able to address, we will certainly be taking them away, chewing on them and discussing them, and hopefully we'll have a chance to continue this conversation. It's a big topic and really hard to do in an hour. So this has hopefully just whetted the appetite and got us going. So I do hope you will want to share your voice. I can see lots of strong opinions, which is great. So that's what this is all about. There's ways to do that. So the first thing is to go to the website, have your say, and download a response template. It's in 3 languages. You input your details, save it on your desktop, and then over the coming weeks, as you watch the videos, read the documents, attend the webinars, participate in outreach events, you'll form your opinions on the proposals, and you can put them into the template. The template is organized according to the different sections of INPAG. So you'll see, like, this was section 30, and there are specific questions that the technical advisory group have framed. You can answer only the ones that you want to. And if you have a comment that you can't see that relates to a particular question, you can also, there's a section at the end for anything else. So record your thoughts in the template and then upload it via the website. Do you want to move to the next slide, please, Brian? Brilliant. Oops, I've lost where I am. I've lost Zoom. Ah, that's it. So we're still on track to issue INPAG, the final version in 2025, ready for adoption. And so we do look forward to more of your input. And as I say, there'll be more topics coming out in Exposure Draft 3, including this really important section on grant reporting and supplementary reporting to donors. So with that, let me just thank you once again. Thank you, Karen, for some not very easy questions thrown at you, and thank you for the team that's been involved in trying to get our heads around this very difficult topic. And we really, really look forward to more conversations with each of you. The recording will be available. It will be available in your email if you registered, and it will also be available on our YouTube and from the website. So thank you very, very much, everybody. See you on Thursday for our last one in the series, and stay in touch. Thank you. Bye-bye.